and welcome to a special Gardener's World where we'll be celebrating the extraordinary world of houseplants.
They have taken the world by storm in recent years, a revolution which has seen gardening move indoors.
So, over the next hour here at Oxford Botanic Garden, we'll be discovering what it is about houseplants that's captured the nation's imagination.
Coming up, we visit one indoor gardener whose love of houseplants has turned his home into a jungle.
Crazy. The man is crazy is probably 90% of the comments that I get with people coming in.
We meet someone who's taken their love of houseplants and gardening to new heights.
I am growing peppers, chilies, sweet potatoes, sweet corn, passion fruits, grapes. That sounds pretty ridiculous now when I'm saying it aloud.
And we join an interior designer who uses his skills to showcase plants at his home in East London.
I try to mimic nature with plants. It's quite important to have all the trailing plants at different heights just to add a bit of interest and give a meander to the eye.
Over the past few years, as a nation, we have fallen in love with houseplants. In fact, since 2019, sales figures for houseplants have gone up 50%. I suppose really I should say falling in love all over again, because many of us will either remember houses or pictures of houses in the 70s full of Swiss cheese plants and spider plants and cacti. All plants that went very out of fashion, but are now very much in fashion again. And the great thing about houseplants is that when you're like me and many people my age, we don't own our own gardens. So having houseplants is the ability to really grow plants and engage with greenery just in your home. And having houseplants is a little bit like having pets, only they're usually easier to look after and you don't have to walk them. For me, one of the most important reasons for growing houseplants is that they really do make your home feel like a home and fill it with greenery and texture and some life. So what is a houseplant? Well, essentially, it's a plant that's evolved somewhere much warmer than here and wouldn't survive outdoors all year in our climate. But the range is so vast, it's really quite an incredible world once you delve into it. You have things like cacti and succulents. So this is a cactus. Things like the mother-in-law's tongue behind me, Sansevieria, that's a succulent, but they're really wonderful houseplants because they're so easy to look after. Then you have foliage-heavy plants, so things like ferns, big leaves that have often evolved in tropical climates. So we have caladium. This is absolutely glorious. Look at those translucent leaves. Bromeliad couldn't be more different. And then really tiny leaf things like peperomia, beautiful little plants. Then you have orchids. People get very into orchids. You have lovely foliage, but also incredible flowers. And something I love are these Tillandsias, air plants, which mean they don't need any soil at all. You can just hang them, spray them regularly, or even take them into the shower with you to keep them alive, but they're so beautiful. And there really is a whole world of plants to explore. Now, plants like Boston ferns, aspidistras, or even pelargoniums are all tried and tested, and we're very familiar with them in our homes. But there are so many unusual and interesting species that we can grow indoors. And on today's programme, we have curated a list of some of the very coolest. Calatheas will add style to any indoor garden. With leaves held upright, these are the prayer plants. And with geometric patterns in every imaginable combination, they are natural works of art. Their metallic leaves and burgundy undersides only add to their appeal. A warm, humid spot out of direct sun will help keep them happy. A shady windowsill in your bathroom or kitchen would be perfect.
And we'll be sharing more of our houseplant favourites throughout the programme. Now, once you acquire a houseplant, it can often lead to another and another and even another. And that was certainly the case for one collector in the Malvern Hills and his long-suffering partner.
It all started with my parents. We live in the countryside, we're surrounded by nature, and gardening's always been something so important and key to us. With time, I got more interested in indoor plants rather than outdoor plants. I'm Johnny Bouchandani, also known as the Bearded Plantaholic. Welcome to my jungle. Crazy, the man is crazy, is probably 90% of the comments that I get when people come in here. I'm a digital marketing director. Some of what I'm doing is quite creative, even though I do have to conform to looking like a penguin sometimes when I go into work. The idea for me was not only to have it on one level, but have it on two levels. Because like a jungle, you've got the jungle floor, and then as you go up into the house, you've got the hanging plants and the creepers and the climbers that go up to the canopy. And it's the type of plants that have big leaves, that are veined, that have variegation, and that often are climbers or creepers because they just give you that jungle vibe straight away. I managed to get my hands on a albo, a variegated Monstera albo, and a Thai constellation as well. My favourite plants probably have got to be philodendrons. Whether you forget that occasional water or you're a little bit heavy-handed, I do find they're more forgiving than other plants. And not only that, but they're stunning. And with time, as they grow and they climb, they grow bigger leaves, and they really do give you a jungle feel. There's one plant that really does stand out to me, and that's the Florida Ghost. We've got variegation. The leaves come out one colour, which is slightly white, and with time go a little bit green. The shape of the leaves are like no other plant that you've seen. They're completely unique. If the house is burning down, one of the first that I would grab would be that plant. Sometimes it does cheese off the partner a little bit, Charlotte. She's been really, really understanding. Definitely not to begin with.
I'm learning to share him with his plants, that's for sure. But I think over time, probably over the period of like the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone from having 2 or 3 plants to 200 or 300. They've just kind of creeped in. Oh, Johnny, not another one. Oh. And I come home and there's random boxes of new plants.
It can be annoying because obviously it's a house.
The mess.
Yeah,
the mess is annoying.
And the soil occasionally, which I do clean up.
His version of cleaning up is different to mine, but you know.
A lot of my money goes into plants, but at the same time I think to myself, in my own way, I'm not addicted to buying clothes. I don't go out to the pub.
I have actually started to become quite proud of it. When my friends come here, but they're like, Charlotte, this is insane. And now obviously it's grown all upstairs and it's taken over the whole house, and they just get a little bit blown away. Like, how do you put up with that? I'm like, I actually quite like it. It's nice, it's relaxing. The kids love getting involved with the plants, but also he's teaching them that, you know, it's good to have a hobby. It's good to be passionate about something. And I think he's a really good role model for them.
To Charlotte's dismay, I bought a greenhouse, 2 metres by 2 metres, and one night while she was sleeping, fixed it all up in her office, obviously. For all plant propagations, it's just the ideal situation. With that climate that's in there, I can just pop it directly into a pot with some soil and it'll root in 2 or 3 days. It's a variegated Adansonii. So yeah, they do really well in humidity. You can see activating all of these aerial roots. We also have some syngoniums. So this is a good example of a milk confettii. So this bad boy here was my first anthurium. It's an Anthurium regale. Absolutely love it. Beautiful coloration, the shape of it as well. These lobes at the top and these striking veins going all the way down, and a sort of velvety appearance. It's actually absolutely incredible. So this is a little prop box. I've got a few of these. It's really good on a budget if you're looking for something to propagate with. It keeps the humidity in, it allows light in because it's all transparent. You'll really be able to propagate things so much easier. Key things that people need to think about is these plants thrive in specific environments. They're growing in substrate that's unique to that place. So if you can try and replicate that, then you're off to a winning start. And secondly, light. Without light, your plant doesn't create any solubles, doesn't create any energy, and won't grow. I do tend to use a humidifier, and it definitely increases to around 70 to 90% the humidity directly in the surrounding areas of that. So all of the plants that do need that tiny bit of moisture and humidity, I will tend to place them closer to the humidifier. It's definitely now a way of life. You're alone with your plants and with your thoughts, and it's that specific time that you have which gives you time to reflect. What's best for my family and what's the best person I can be? So I think it definitely rubs off on your mental health and calms you as well as a person.
Well, I could certainly live more than happily in Johnny's jungle. Now, here in the Rainforest House at the Botanic Garden, they've created the absolute optimum conditions to keep these magnificent plants happy. And on a smaller scale, we're bringing plants like these into our homes as houseplants. And so the question is, how best to recreate those conditions and keep them happy? Well, who better to ask than Deputy Director here, Dr. Chris Thorogood. I think for me, Chris, one of the joys of houseplants is just bringing that kind of vibrance into your home.
They just breathe life into a room, don't they? I always think a room without a houseplant looks like there's something missing to me. Just having a living thing in your room, I totally agree with you. And
in terms of people growing them, I guess the key skill is about sort of replicating as much as you can their environment in the wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just next to me here, we're surrounded by some bromeliads, and these in nature grow perched in the treetop canopy of the rainforest, for example. And this gives us clues about how they like to be treated. So as you can see, it's very free draining. They don't like their roots to be sitting in water or to get wet for too long. Lots of sort of filtered bright sunlight because they're quite high up in the canopy.
So I guess the advice really is just do a quick bit of research and see where that plant comes from.
Exactly, and then there are other plants that grow in similar environments, like this potted epipremnum here, and this one grows in a similar sort of environment to the bromeliads in the rainforest, but this one grows either as a clambering plant or a climbing or trailing plant, so it often grows up the trees into the canopy, and for that reason this plant is quite happy to withstand a fair amount of shade because it starts life on the forest floor, but also quite a lot of sunlight too.
I mean, I always think it's interesting how resilient or not different plants are. So there's a thing I grow called Zamioculcas, or the ZZ plant, and I think that's got to be one of the most resilient. You can forget to water it for 3 months, you can overwater it for 3 months, you can have it in full sun, or you can put it in shade.
If you're going to be away a lot or you go on long holidays, this is a plant that will just soldier on. You know, you don't need to water it all the time. It really thrives on neglect.
I guess so many people would just instinctively put their houseplants on a windowsill, but actually in direct sun. But actually that's not always the way forward, is it?
It's important to think about how these plants grow in their natural environment and, as you say, where they come from. And so another example, Nick, which has just opened for us within the last hour, is this beautiful little potted cactus. And of course, the examples we've just been looking at might like to be quite warm and wet and have high humidity most of the time. Whereas these guys, the cacti and the other succulents, they grow naturally in sort of desert environments and dry rocky slopes on mountains. And so these, in our experience, don't mind getting very cold, but they certainly do mind getting cold and wet, so keeping it quite dry on a sunny windowsill would be ideal for something like this.
Now, I talk to gardeners around the country, and the constant question I get is, how much water do I give my houseplant? And they want an exact answer, of course. I tend to sort of think a general rule, the vast majority of plants, is let them get relatively dry. If they're sort of dry at about 1 inch down, then re-soak. Would that be your...
Yes, and again, I think it depends on the plants we're talking about. So for something like these tropical bromeliads, I'd be tempted to keep the humidity high and keep them as damp as possible for most of the time. For something like a cactus, I mean, if it's kept cool enough and it's bright and sunny, I might not water it for 3 months and it would be fine. So it really does depend on the plant.
And in terms of keeping a humidity up in the house, obviously you can mist. Something I've tended to do is to sit them on a tray of gravel that you then fill with water just to get that ambient humidity slowly working.
Perfect, yeah, I mean, I do that too, and sort of spraying and misting them. But you know, the best thing I love to do is to recreate a tropical monsoon. Put them in the bathtub, get the shower out and just hose them down.
Throughout today's programme, we are bringing you the gardener's world choices of the most on-trend and desirable houseplants that you can bring into your home. And here is our next selection. Looking for a low-maintenance addition to your windowsill? Then a cactus or succulent could be the answer. Adding a stark beauty to an inside space, these are plants that will thrive on neglect. Cactus spines are usually modified leaves, which, in the wild, help to protect their swollen stems from being eaten by animals. Aloes are among the easiest succulents to look after. Their fleshy leaves display an amazing range of texture and form. Easy to propagate from baby offsets, they are the pick and mix of the houseplant world. This agave, it's huge. It's absolutely monumental. Far bigger than anyone can fit in their house, but you can get it on a smaller scale, and it shows you that incredible architectural structure, which is what makes them such an exciting proposition for our homes. Now, I'm always moving my houseplants around, different rooms, different positions within the room to see how they really change the feel of your home environment. But we met one gardener who's also an interior designer who has found the perfect space to experiment with just that.
I've lived here at Clapton Tram for the last 7 years now. This is my home as well as my business, and it's also a design studio for me. So it has many hats, and it's a great space to live. Hello, my name's John Bassam, and I live in this historic tram depot in East London with my border collie called Jack. I was looking for a big, light, airy space where I could have some large specimens of plants. The light's amazing here. Having the double height space and all the daylight coming in the skylights, it just works so well with plants. It was originally a horse-drawn tram depot in the 1830s, and this was actually one of the stables for the horses. And each one of these units held 22 horses. It's quite beautiful because you can see the natural erosion on the floor of where the horses' hooves kind of dug in. And I love that about the space. And having the concrete floor means I can just water everything and mop it up afterwards. Release the hound. The watering schedule is on a Sunday, and I just revisit each plant and just go around, and I'm going up and down ladders and I'm carrying water, and I've got a spinning border collie below me, so it's quite a kind of focused act. I try to mimic nature with plants. It's quite important to have all the trailing plants at different heights, just to add a bit of interest and give a meander to the eye. I wanted to have that foreground, that middle distance, and that background with a layering of plants. With the monsteras, I hang them quite high, and it's quite beautiful to see how the aerial roots come down. And it's amazing how once they reach the floor, they just stop. I bought this fishbone cactus 5-6 years ago now, and it's a really good size specimen. Every October, it completely is covered in the most amazing transient flowers, which only last around 12 hours, but it will flower for all of October. And the scent is absolutely divine. The Tradescantia is known as the inch plant because it just grows so rapidly. So, I mean, in the summer, they grow really, really rapidly. The spider plants I will group just because they look a bit more kind of dramatic. If you're going to use this many plants in a space, it can't all be individual plants. You need to have a few kind of repeating pieces. This oxalis is one of my favourite plants. If I'm up early enough, I will see that the leaves are all closed, and it's like a butterfly how it opens up with the sun. So it's quite a beautiful plant. It's very responsive to its environment. The Begonia maculata, which people absolutely love, the spotted begonia, and I've just dotted it all around. So rather than having one plant in one pot, I've done underplanting. So there'll be a monstera with a begonia and a few kind of trailing plants below it. If I have a plant in a pot and there's still some spare soil around the bottom, I put a lot of mind your own business in there. Some people call it a pest, but if you grow it in a container, it's relatively controlled. It helps cover the brown soil at the bottom, and it stops the water evaporating off the soil. One of the biggest problems with plants is keeping the kind of water levels within the soil. So if you have a very small hanging plant and the wind's blowing around it, it could dry out within a day or two. So the larger the plant container, the easier it is to control the water levels within the soil. Finding nice plant pots can be quite tricky. There are lots of lovely glazed pots available on the market, but they can be quite expensive. And all of the pots which I use are just terracotta pots with a bit of emulsion on. I'm by no means a plant expert. I don't have any particularly kind of like rare, expensive plants. Some of my plants are actually found at Columbia Road Flower Market, where once everyone's leaving, there's lots of cuttings just trotted around on the floor. For table centerpieces, I will do cuttings rather than flowers. I've got some Begonia maculata here, which I'm putting into these tall vintage vases. And I'm just going to combine it with a bit of a purple Tradescantia just to add a bit of interesting colour. At the end of my dinner, I let my guests take the cuttings, so they're leaving with a little gift as well. When I first started doing cuttings, I wanted to make more of a feature of them because I found the root structures so beautiful. So I found some lovely ball kind of corbels and some nice specimen test tube vases, just to create more of a feature of the propagation system. I think reconnecting to nature is such an important thing, and finally people seem to be embracing it. So many people live in a city now, so having that element of the countryside within an urban environment is so important. I mean, I couldn't imagine any other way than waking up. I love waking up in my bedroom and having the view onto the space. I don't know how I'd cope in London without it.
What a beautifully created set of plants John has put together. Now, still to come on today's programme.
We join Rachel as she looks into the weird and wonderful world of orchids.
These flowers are so delicate, so beautiful.
So pretty, aren't they?
But the fragrance, I mean, just get...
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's like honey.
yeah,
It's so
yeah.
sweet and delicious.
And visit a keen grower whose garden and balcony, 18 floors up, bring him nothing but joy.
Okay, yeah, I am wearing wellies, and I'm more than aware that I do not have real grass on this balcony, but I want to be a real gardener too, so I'm going to wear my wellies.
As we've seen, once you get the bug for indoor gardening, things can quickly escalate. Now, while certain houseplants are very affordable, recent demand has seen others skyrocket in price. But the good news is that you can get plants for free. Now, this is a form of Dracaena, or otherwise known as a dragon tree. It's one of the most popular houseplants,
and it's really easy and satisfying to propagate from. And so, in fact, these are just 3 cuttings sat in this pot. What I'm going to do is take another cutting from the top of the plant. And so I'm going to look just below a leaf node and then make a cut just in there. So it's not particularly complicated. I'm going to take off this lower couple of leaves. That just helps reduce some of the water loss. Now, you could, in theory, propagate this in compost, but it will work just as easily in water. So if you can put it on a windowsill somewhere it can keep relatively warm, but it's not going to get blasting sunlight all day, that could just be popped in, and within 2 to 3 weeks, you'll start to see some little nodes appearing, and then give it another sort of 2 or 3 weeks, about 6 weeks in total, and what you'll have is massive roots appearing at the base there, which can then be potted straight into some compost and allowed to grow away. So that's a simple stem cutting, and you can do the same kind of thing with plants like Tradescantia. You can also do it with Monstera deliciosa, the delicious monster, that huge Swiss cheese plant. So that's stem cuttings. Another approach is to look at individual leaf cuttings, and this you can certainly do with Sansevieria, or mother-in-law's tongue. You can also do it with things like Streptocarpus. And so with this, I'm going to take a healthy leaf from the plant. This is incidentally one of the best house plants in terms of producing oxygen in your home. And this is a slightly unusual looking propagation technique, but it's highly effective. And so what I'm going to do here is literally just slice up sections of this leaf. I'm going to aim for about 3 or 4 centimetres for each section. And what I'll do is then allow them on a windowsill or in a glass house to dry down and callus for a couple of days. Now, the one absolutely key thing is that you keep them the right way up when you do that. So when it comes to potting up, you don't pot them upside down. And so, given a couple of days to callus over, they'll be ready to start rooting. And so you just need to pop them into a pot, nice gritty compost, relatively free draining. Tap that down and be absolutely sure that your leaves are the right way up. And so I'm going to start placing these pieces of leaf cutting about sort of 2/3 into the compost. They can just sit beside each other, firm in, of course, there's good compost contact. And in 5 or 6 weeks' time, you'll find little plantlets are starting to shoot from the base. They can then, of course, be lifted out, potted into a gritty mix, and allowed to grow on. So that's really simple leaf cuttings. Finally, you can do divisions with certain plants. So this Ledeboria conveniently produces lots of perfect little plantlets that are absolutely ready to go and be repotted. So if I knock this out of its pot, let's just tip this out. And so you can see each bulb produces yet another bulbule beside it. And so if I just gently tease this away, you will see that it's basically a series of plants that are absolutely ready to go. So I can see, actually, if I split this just here, we've now got a perfect little plant that's got its roots, got its leaves, and so all you need to do is to replicate the mix it's in. In this instance, it's a very sort of gritty, sandy mix, wants to be nice and free draining, and then simply pot it as you would a new plant. So roots down into the base. Want to ensure that this little bulb is about half buried or so. Firm it in, and that is about as complicated as the propagation is. So that will just simply start to grow away now. Water it, and be a great gift for a friend.
This is so cool. This is one of my favourite houseplants. It's a philodendron. You see them all over, but usually they're really small, and this one is enormous. Look at the size of the leaves and the beautiful trunk. And it's planted up with what looks like a forest floor, which I suppose it would be in the wild, but it's absolutely beautiful. And these are all, again, incredibly common houseplants. This is a Calathea with lovely variegated leaves. A Pilea here, and then this is a peace lily. And this was actually the first houseplant I ever bought when I was a student. And I think many people, this is their first entry into the world of houseplants. But it looks so effective underneath here. It works really well.
Whether you're buying your first houseplant or adding to an established indoor garden, on today's programme, we're highlighting a whole series of plants we think should be on your radar. Beautiful and bizarre, aroids sound like they're out of a sci-fi film. But this group includes some of the largest and most majestic of all houseplants. Alocasias have giant heart-shaped leaves with prominent veins. Mist them whenever you can to make them feel at home. Monsteras are one of the best-known aroids. But if you're short on space, smaller varieties like the monkey mask will still give you a taste of the tropics.
Buying plants that look amazing is great, of course, but how do we keep them looking amazing? A really key part of that process is potting them on when they need it. And that's because a plant sitting in the same pot for too long will run out of nutrients in the compost, the roots become incredibly congested, and getting water into the plant is more difficult. The key thing is knowing when to pot on though, and how do you tell? So look at its position in the pot. Is it central? Does it have plenty of room to grow? If so, it's probably fine. Also look at its leaves. If it has any discoloration or yellowing, then it's probably a sign it needs repotting and some fresh nutrients adding to that compost. A surefire way of telling if a plant needs repotting is looking at these drainage holes at the bottom. If there are roots emerging from these drainage holes, that is a sure sign we need to pot it on. The reason for that is because these roots will eventually clog up the drainage holes and the plant will become waterlogged. So I suspect this will have quite a good root system on it when I take it out. Ooh. Yeah, there we go. See, it's just beginning to go around the base of that pot, which means we've caught it in perfect time. Now the key thing is deciding what size pot it needs to go into. Now, you might be tempted to put it in the biggest pot you can find, but actually that's not going to help the plant at all. Too much compost tends to get waterlogged. What you instead want is something that will allow it plenty of room to grow without swamping it. If you can get a finger down each side comfortably and maybe an inch or two at the bottom, that's exactly what you want. And this will be really happy in there and grow quite quickly. One trowelful on the bottom should be enough. And I'll just sit that on here and make sure it's sitting at a level where the top of the soil is just below the rim of the pot. So when I water that, it doesn't all just pour straight off the edge. And then I tend to just use my hand to fill around the edges. This is just a multi-purpose peat-free compost that should be absolutely perfect for a spider plant like this. Just give the pots a really good shake. That will knock the soil down to the bottom and then you can press it in just to really firm it. And then water plants immediately after you've potted them on. And there we go. That is a spider plant that will hope to be happy there for at least another year or two. Now, for a slightly more specialist kind of plant, things like succulents and cacti, it's ever so slightly different. These are slow-growing plants. Now, this is a cactus that you might buy in a garden centre in a pot this sort of size, and you may think that when you get that home it needs potting on because it's in such a small pot. In actual fact, that could stay in here for, I would say, another year or so. And the way to tell when it needs potting on is when it gets much bigger and begins to fall over regularly. Then you know it's got too big. Now, something that definitely does need potting on is this Stapelia. This is a kind of succulent, and you can see it's huge. It's sort of beginning to sprawl out the sides, but look at this mass of roots underneath, so much so that it's pretty unstable. So that's a prime candidate for potting on. But because it's a succulent, it needs a slightly different compost from a bog standard house plant. You can buy specialist cactus compost if you want to, but I'm going to make my own, which is just using a peat-free multi-purpose mixed with grit in about a 50-50 ratio. Succulents and cacti do not like to sit in too much water, so this just gets their drainage to optimum levels. Now the best time for potting up any houseplants is in the spring and the summer. High light levels mean that they are in more active growth at that time. Now a little bit of a top dress, some gravel. It looks nicer, but also it stops the water from sitting too much around the base of that plant. That looks great. And now the all-important wobble test. Ta-da! Now this is a really simple process, but a really effective way of keeping your houseplants looking their best. One plant that's not quite so simple, but is still incredibly fascinating, is the orchid. And Rachel went to visit a specialist nursery down in Devon to find out more about them.
Give me a rose, a tulip or a dahlia and I'm happy. I know where I am with them. But I'm the first to admit that when it comes to the orchid family, they're still a bit of a mystery. Sarah Ritterhausen runs Burnham Nurseries, a family business which has been growing orchids for over 70 years. So I couldn't be in better hands, and I'm hoping to get a masterclass in how to get started. Sarah, I'm so excited to be here. I mean, just surrounded by this amount of colour this early in the year. And of course, orchids are a huge group of plants, isn't it?
It is. There's about 30,000 species of orchids all around the world, and they're so diverse.
Starting with something fairly simple to grow. These are phalaenopsis, aren't they?
Yeah, so the phalaenopsis really suit like the modern home the best. We like it warm and cosy, so do the phalaenopsis. So just pop them in a warm spot, out of the bright summer sun, and not to overwater them. That's the biggest mistake that people make, is they water them too often, and then the roots stay too wet, and then the roots rot. In the wild, these type of orchids would actually grow on a tree, so they're called an epiphyte. So growing them in a pot, they will make aerial roots escaping out over the side of the pot. They flower for long periods of time, months at a time, and more than most other orchids. And then the other thing that the phalaenopsis do is that they have this ability to reflower off the same flower stem. But if they're being stubborn, you can try a few tricks. You can move them, give them a change, slight drop in temperature, a bit of orchid feed. All those sort of things help boost the flowers to come again.
Fantastic.
These are Coelogene, and this comes from high up in the Himalayan mountains. And it's a really cool growing orchid. You probably noticed these sort of large swollen bulbs at the base of the plant. They're called pseudobulbs, and it's a food and water storage system for the plant. It's had a little rest over the winter where we've kept it drier, and these bulbs have been nice and fat and plump, like big juicy grapes. And now, in the spring, they're growing new leaves and they're beautiful flowers, and this is now when we're watering them more. They really need a really cool room, maybe an unheated room in the house, but somewhere with plenty of light as well.
These flowers are so delicate, so beautiful.
So pretty, aren't they?
But the fragrance, I mean, just get...
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's like honey.
Yeah,
it's so sweet and delicious. Ah, I recognise these, Sarah. Cymbidiums, yes?
Yes, they're cool growing, high altitude orchids in the wild. Down to about 10 degrees or a little bit below at night in the winter. But actually, in the summer, you can put these outdoors in the garden. They really enjoy that little holiday outside.
Yes.
These are Oncidiums, so this is another cool growing group of orchid. And this one's called Oncidium Shari Baby. And it looks pretty, it looks beautiful, but have you smelt it?
Oh, that's like cocoa or something, is it?
Chocolate smelling orchid.
Chocolate smelling,
It's a great selling point.
Yes,
you know.
definitely.
Low calorie, but smells good.
Smells just as good.
This is extraordinary. Look at the roots coming all the way down here.
Yeah, these are the Vanda orchids, and these are a little bit more of a challenge. We don't grow them with any sort of bark compost around their roots. They're just hanging in the air, and because of this, we have to give them lots of spraying and lots of heat and humidity. A really good way that people have found to grow them is to actually take this root ball here and kind of wind it into a big glass vase. And then if you keep it moist and damp inside there, then it creates like this mini greenhouse around the roots. We're now looking at some really, really weird and wonderful members of the orchid family. This is a bulbophyllum. This is an African species, and it has these big chunky pseudobulbs, but then also these really weird kind of twisted flower stems. And then the flowers, I always think, look like little beetles kind of creeping up the stem.
Look at this.
So this is a completely different type of orchid. This is a Dracula. And this comes from really humid rainforests of South America. This is better viewed from underneath, really. You know, you can look right up into the flower and you can see it's almost got like a little kind of monkey face.
Orchids have always been a popular choice as houseplants, and by thinking a little bit about where to place them and the best temperature and humidity, I can grow a wide range quite easily. They can be the perfect houseplant for colour, beauty and scent.
This is one of my absolute favourite houseplants, and I don't think it's grown nearly often enough. It's called Acminis, and the thing for me that makes it so fantastic is its range of colours, and they'll happily flower for a good 3, 4, even 5 months, potentially up to autumn. And at that point, you can let the plant go dormant, so you start reducing the watering, and the plant will die back. You can cut off the dead stems, it can sit dormant through winter, and then in spring, start watering it and feeding it again, and it will burst back into life and give you that fantastic run of beautiful, almost petunia-looking flowers. So this is a great plant, and today we've been showcasing other plants that might just pique your interest.
If you don't have a windowsill, hanging baskets are a good alternative. String of Hearts is a trailing succulent which can take a sunny spot. The fashionable fishbone cactus has striking zigzag leaves. And, as we saw earlier, it does well in a hanging basket. To encourage those beautiful blooms, remember to feed it over the summer. Hoyas are usually grown as climbers, but Hoya bella is more compact and will happily dangle. Its waxy white flowers release a delicious scent when they open.
There are some extraordinary sights here at Oxford Botanic Garden, and none more so than this. It doesn't look cuddly, and it isn't cuddly, and that is because this is a carnivorous plant, which means it gets some of its nutrients from its prey in the form of insects. In other words, it's a killer. Dr. Chris Thorogood is on a mission to bring carnivorous curiosities into the houseplant fold. Beautiful but deadly, I guess, is the word for these.
Aren't they the most striking works of nature? You know, I've always found these plants fascinating. And since I was a kid, naturally, I think a lot of children find these plants interesting, and it's a great way into horticulture or botany.
What is this plant then, and tell me how it works?
So this is a Nepenthes pitcher plant, so it's from the tropics. And what we're looking at here is the leaf, but it functions as a deadly insect trap. So the insects are attracted to a sugary nectar that it produces on the trap, and these lovely bright colours. And what happens is the insect lands on this part, and I don't know if you want to feel it, but it's very smooth in one direction because of those ridges.
Yeah, that is very smooth.
And that leads the insects to tumble off into the leafy abyss, and at the bottom is a pool of digestive fluid, and if I tip it upside down you can see, see the fluid coming out.
Yeah.
So this is effectively a plant's stomach.
And I'm guessing there's not much chance of escape.
No, and once it's in the liquid, that liquid's quite sticky in many cases, and then if it tries to scamper up the inside of the pitcher, well, if you feel the inside there, it's really smooth because it's got a waxy coating, and this clogs the poor little insects' claws, their feet, and again they tumble back down into the liquid, so they really have no way out.
I love plants, but I'm actually feeling quite sorry for these insects. But the whole idea of this is to feed the plants.
That's exactly right. So carnivorous plants, they evolved in conditions where nutrients are very scarce, and so they supplement their diet with insects. In fact, I've got a whole little shop of horrors for us to look at.
Wow, it's a varied array, isn't it? They don't all look the same.
So this one is a North American pitcher plant, so rather like the one we've just looked at, though it's not related. But this one has little downward pointing spines, and again, if you touch them in the inward direction, they're very smooth and slippery.
Yes.
And then in the other direction, they're quite rough. So
a bit like Velcro, isn't it?
yeah, no, exactly, exactly. And we've got some other examples here as well. So let's have a look at this one. This is a sundew, or a Drosera is its scientific name. And can you see that wonderful gluey substance? Isn't it incredible?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the little insects get stuck and the leaf will curl over and asphyxiate its poor little victim. And then I think we've got the plant that many people are familiar with, the Venus flytrap.
Yes.
And its leafy jaws lie in wait of unsuspecting insect prey. It's really formidable looking. And on the inner surface you can see those three little spines, small ones. So if the insect touches those once, nothing happens, but if it touches them again quickly, the trap is sprung.
No way, so the plant can actually count?
In a way, yes. And that's a safeguard against it wasting its valuable resources on closing on, for example, a fallen leaf. So do you dare touch it, Francis?
Well, I'll touch it once. I'm not going to lose a finger, am I?
Let's see.
1, 2.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, it is amazing, isn't it? You can see why people are so fascinated by these. As houseplants, how good are these? Because I can see that they even bring some beauty with lovely flowers as well.
They've got a reputation for being tricky, and I think it's about knowing what they like and what they don't like, and there are some rules of thumb. So many of the carnivorous plants, they won't fare too well with tap water. So I would be thinking about giving them rainwater, or you could give them some tepid water left over that you've boiled in the kettle.
In terms of compost, what are these growing in?
Yeah, so we do recommend generally using a specialist compost, and you can get hold of those for carnivorous plants. I certainly wouldn't use a multi-purpose compost, because really for a carnivorous plant that's a kiss of death, because it's packed full of all the nutrients that are so good for other plants that these plants just hate.
So these are all fairly simple. What about the Nepenthes? Is that more challenging?
Yeah, they can be. So like the plants we've just looked at, they have their likes and dislikes, and so this is one for which I would say humidity is ever so important.
It's a good challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for showing me them.
You're welcome.
Fascinating.
We've been shining the spotlight on houseplants today. But it's not just ornamental plants that you can grow in the absence of a garden. We went to visit one enthusiast who's been growing a plethora of fruit and vegetables 18 stories up in a tower block.
In the balcony garden, I am growing lots of different types of tomatoes. And then I have peppers, chilies, sweet potatoes, spinach, sweet corn, passion fruits, grapes. That sounds pretty ridiculous now when I'm saying it aloud. I haven't actually done that before. Wow. My name's Jason. I live in city centre of Manchester, and I'm on the 18th floor. When I moved into this property, it was just as the pandemic had hit. And then, of course, one of the only places that were open were garden centres, so I had no other choice but to go plant shopping. It's a south-facing balcony. It's roughly about 10 metres long. What I chose to do is just get one flower, and I thought that would just really brighten up the space a little bit. and it happened to be a marigold. And then I wasn't happy with just the marigold, and then a year and a half later it's turned into this jungle, like it does. The microclimate for the balcony is completely different to a ground level gardener. So we had a heat wave a while back, and I think we were having temperatures of around about 32 degrees at ground level, but up here it was 42, 46. And so the stress that puts the plants under, those fluctuations are really, really difficult to contend with. And so it's a constant learning curve. But it's also a unique challenge because it works in reverse. In winter, I don't get frost on the balcony. Any frost that does happen overnight will go along the glass and not on any of the plants. So I actually can extend my growing season, and I will still be able to harvest tomatoes all throughout Christmas. Who does that? With the indoor garden, I have a particular type of plant that I like. It can't just be something with a green leaf. It has to be something with a particular shape, or a vine, or a size. There's got to be something kind of unique about the plant. I think naming some of my plants has probably helped me to see them as part of my family. Like Chad, for example, he is my monstera, my very first houseplant. I was going to cut and propagate him, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So then I decided, okay, fine, let me go and buy another plant. So then I bought a smaller one, a baby one, and her name is Becky. But then because I named her Becky, now I can't propagate from her either. So it's pretty ridiculous. So now I've ended up with multiple plants, and they just have to leave them to do what they want to do. I don't like the word suffer or struggle, but I have to deal with anxiety and depression, and so sometimes I will wake up and I will not want to get out of bed. It's just a fact. And then what keeps me going, or what will push me to make that first step to get out of bed, is knowing that I need to go and water Simon. I need to go and look after Chad. I need to go and get Teddy ready. And it's just having those little bits and pieces, and because I'm kind of giving back to nature a bit, it kind of helps me as a person, and then I feel a lot better and can start my day. With this particular elephant here, when I brought it home, the leaves snapped and it only had this leaf left. It was looking pretty miserable, but I decided to continue working on it and feeding it, giving it water, and now it has produced this larger leaf and it's now producing a new one. So I think because at times I might feel broken, I would look at this plant and feel kind of connected to it in a way, and so it's kind of a reminder to me of what I need to do to take care of myself. I need to put the work in myself in order to bounce back.
Okay, yeah, I am wearing wellies, and I'm more than aware that I do not have real grass on this balcony, but I want to be a real gardener too, so I'm going to wear my wellies. This is ridiculous.
Essentially, it is a glass house, so even if it is raining, that balcony doesn't get any rain on it whatsoever. So I still have to go out and water that balcony every few days or so.
I think it takes round about 6 or 7 trips to the sink, so it can be a very, very time-consuming exercise.
It's been a really interesting 1.5-year journey to see where the garden started and where it is now. What I have learned is that I need to grow what I can grow, and so I have some plants that have got a darker foliage, like my Black Magic Colocasia, and I have some cannas, and they absolutely thrive off the sunlight. My Black Magic, he had 2 or 3 leaves, and now he's just put out his biggest leaf, and he's absolutely thriving. It's just about starting the conversation that yes, you can use your small spaces, but also you have to know that your own small space is unique to you, and you just need to figure out what works. My plants in general, they give me peace, they give me joy. If you were to walk onto my balcony is in essence an extension of the flooring of my apartment. So that means that structurally I can have a lot more out on my balcony than other people. Some other balconies are essentially attached on. So I'm extremely lucky that I can have this out on my balcony.
I really approve of Jason wearing wellies to garden indoors. It's excellent. And achieving a garden like that on the 18th floor is really impressive. It's also clear that growing plants and gardening has really helped Jason on his journey with his well-being. And it seems apt that in Mental Health Awareness Week, we all acknowledge that gardening and growing plants is a really important part of that conversation. Now, on this week's programme, we're giving you some of our recommendations for plants that will certainly engage your mind positively. And here is our 5th and final selection. Often thought of as tricky plants, ferns can thrive in your home. Who could resist the blue star fern with its palm-shaped fronds covered in silvery bloom, giving them a ghostly appearance? Or what about the button fern with its tiny round leaves? It does best in an ericaceous compost with a bit of perlite mixed in. And where possible, stick to the use of rainwater. Whichever type of fern you go for, avoid hot, sunny windowsills and radiators. Allow it to linger in the shade, then simply enjoy.
It never ceases to amaze me just how many different plants we can grow indoors, and just such a range from vast leafy things to tiny little things to sit in the bathroom.
And something we haven't mentioned is also things you can eat. I'm always growing ginger and lemongrass and things indoors, which just, for me anyway, always adds an extra layer of interest and use.
Just bringing that life and vibrance into your home. And it doesn't have to be hard. I mean, there's plants you can leave without watering for months and they'll look great.
Totally. I don't know about you though, I have found that as soon as you start growing houseplants, you end up with a jungle pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's certainly an addiction. And I mean, they're so easy to propagate. It's fantastic. You can bulk up your own collection. I love sharing them with friends.
You might share them with friends. I keep all mine. Well, that's all we have time for today. But Gardeners World will be back next Friday at Longmeadow with Monty, Friday at 8 p.m.
So until next time, goodbye.